thinking of total chaos and someone doing what they're not supposed to do, immediately it makes me think of David Soldier here, who has, are there any limits to what he won't do in the name of stretching the boundaries of what is or isn't possible, teaching elephants to make music and to paint, trying to compose the absolutely worst song in the world.
Which was successful.
And it's
It's my biggest seller.
yeah, I think it's a lot better than the
It's
best
sold
song.
about 20,000 copies.
Yeah.
But statistically,
Right.
it's the most popular song in the universe. We can
Amazing.
prove it.
Yeah.
With statistics.
Statistics are very valuable. It's great that he could be here. David Soldier.
Thank you. And I really appreciate David and Stephanie for asking me here, and I really appreciate Philip and Tyler and Ann, both for their talks and putting me on the segment, and because they've just given me a whole 3 straw men and women, which are going to be a lot of fun. The straw man argument is an argument us academic scientists use all the time. We kind of pretend that somebody said something they didn't actually say. So we have a thesis which absolutely defeats them and makes us really special. And the last one is from Anne. And Anne says the reason we academic scientists don't want artists in our laboratories is because they're unpredictable. And my counter thesis to Anne, which I'm sure you cannot deny this, well, go ahead, deny it, is that the real difference between academic artists and academic scientists is when an academic artist gives a talk, they will type it out and they'll read it. And I've never seen a laboratory scientist do that, and I know that you're both, because you have the notes, and then sometimes you read from the notes, and sometimes you put the notes aside and extemporize like an experimental scientist. So I think that's the fundamental difference between art and science. Now I'm going to say regarding Tyler has, ranges of sort of evolutionary changes in organization, and I'm going to take several of them and squash them down and say it's not just, science has gone beyond the cave paintings. I think science and cave paintings are going to be very similar, and not only that, but obviously I'm going to say animals and maybe even pre-animals participate in something like cave painting and art. So Vitaly Komar, who was supposed to give this talk with me today, and along with his ex-partner Alex Melamed, are the people that taught Thai elephants to paint. There's actually a bit of history in that, and we're going to get into that. So he's couldn't make the plane to get here, but he is actually present in a sense, in that we recorded a story from him yesterday about this is a great place to introduce the story, because it's been handed down, but it's not in any of the books. It's not in Mia Feynman's very good book on elephant art. It's not anywhere. It's not even in David's book. But on the beginning of elephant art, and perhaps the beginning of abstract expressionism, what's going to tie everything together I'm talking about today is abstraction. So you're going to hear that story in the midpoint. Here's what I'm going to try to get through if I can. First, from our laboratory science work, what's the difference between art and science? One thing that scientists say all the time that really irritates their partners and families and other people are, I looked at this molecule, it's beautiful, or what I saw today is beautiful. Show it to them, and I show it to my mother, and my mother says, well, what's beautiful? It's a bunch of junk, it's like, it looks ugly. No, to scientists, it's beautiful. So I'd like to give you some examples of what is in nature that scientists think are beautiful and why. And I hope in a couple of pictures and slides, you'll understand something about why they say some of these ideas are beautiful. So what do they mean? The second part, I'll try to transition in. I don't know if you can fix that. We're not getting quite the whole screen on this. But the secret history of perhaps the beginning of the abstract expressionist movement, which is Vasily Kandinsky, who visited the elephant who was drawing in the Berlin Zoo before World War I. So you'll hear that in Vitaly's talk. And finally, taking some of these ideas, which all have to do, again, with abstraction, but abstraction from nature, and some work we're doing these days to try to put that just not in visual art, but also in music, by abstracting qualities in music. So this is about the only, maybe I'll show you 2, quote, hard science slides. No math, but this is, and this will not be too difficult for artists, because you were actually trained in this if you studied all. So the colors that we see in all the animals that you've been seeing today, where do those colors come from? By the way, in us mammals, we only have one pigment. Our only pigment is melanin. So that's all, even despite everybody's differences in skin and hair color and so on. The only pigment in hair and skin is melanin, which is a long chain compound that derives from dopa, L-dopa, the stuff that gives people Parkinson's disease. Other animals, flies, for instance, have many different pigments. Our other pigments are kind of accidental. Hemoglobin, right, the red in blood. And we have other pigments associated with aging, which are sort of accidents that occur in the cell. There's something called lipofuscin. There's a pigment in the brain called neuromelanin. But how do all these pigments have color? So as you all know, if you, not all of you, but all of you went to art school. So light is all moving at the speed of light, but there's different intensities in the light. So if you take sunlight or white light that's shining down here, and look at all those particles, those light particles, they're moving with different amounts of power. And if they're moving with a lot of power, they're vibrating, right? They're all vibrating. But some of them have so much power, they're all shooting across, but they're vibrating like this. And if you can put some a prism or some wet air, like with the rainbow, some of them will be refracted at different angles depending upon how much power is in there. So you get this kind of separation. This is the visible spectrum, but underneath there's a whole bunch of area which is ultraviolet light, very high energy, and infrared, which is lower energy. Ultraviolet light will kill you. Infrared light you can be exposed to, even goes through glass, and you can be exposed to it a lot. And it's quite safe. So this is what you, again, I don't know if there's anything you can do to the screen to get there. We're actually not able to see the infrared, which is way out here. And the ultraviolet would be over here. And if you keep going this way, you eventually hit microwaves. And if you go this way, you'd hit X-rays, okay? So high energy, low energy. And there's just a little tiny bit of this energy that happens to fall in our visual areas. So let's go where our rods and cones can sense them. Actually, if we kept going long way out there, these are nanometers, billionth of a meter. If we went further enough, we'd get into the kinds of vibrations we hear in sound and music, which are roughly 40 hertz, 40 times a second. Enormous, big, long waves. But if you take those waves and you put them up to a speaker, you're going to hear sound. Okay, so what gives colors to these different pigments? And what gives it, and maybe this is not something the artists are thinking of so much, is it's not what's emitted, it's what's absorbed. So let's say we want to design a yellow pigment. What we need is to take a molecule that absorbs over here, opposite of that color wheel that you all learned. Right? We want something red. We want something that absorbs in green because it holds back those light particles with that energy, and then whatever is reflected is the rest of the stuff. Okay, so that's how we're going to make a pigment. So what's a beautiful molecule? So I asked Roland Hoffman, many of you know him, he's a great chemist up in Ithaca, in Cornell. What are your favorite molecules? Well, one of his favorite molecules, this is not actually one of his top 3, but it's a really beautiful one. And that's, I don't know, are there any chemists here? What is it? It's in the book. Oh, I wrote it. Listen, now look at this. This is a super cool molecule, and it's the indigo pigment that you're all familiar with, okay? And if we look at it, we could say, non-chemists, what's cool about this? And one thing you could see, if you stare at it just for a second, is it's symmetrical. Isn't that neat? There's not so many of these kind of symmetrical molecules of this size that we use. And so you could kind of fold it over and upside down, and it would be the same thing. Now, a chemist is also going to look at this, especially if they're into color, and they're going to look at this structure. They're going to say, this is a C double bond here, and there's a C double bonded with an oxygen over there. And what's that mean? What that means is you're probably going to absorb light, and you do absorb light. Okay. Also, I wanted to show you that even though a chemist would look at this in black and white and say it's beautiful, I actually painted it, right? So now that I've painted it, it's art. We live in New York. Those of us who live in New York know it is art because it's painted. You can hang it on a wall, but it's real art. You can sell it in a gallery. That means it's definitely art. Okay, so we've got art here. So everybody here, the artists and scientists, can all admit that this is beautiful. So now, why does this have an indigo color? And the reason is just what you saw on the color wheel, which should show up here. Whoops. I don't know why it didn't, but oh, because it's running off the screen. Okay. What I have down here on the bottom of the screen, if you can see it, would be where the absorbance is and where the reflection is. Okay. The reflection turns out to be around 500. So 500 nanometers. That's a blue. An important pigment for us. If I knew about the previous talk, I would have shown chlorophyll instead, but I didn't know that what you were going to show, so instead I showed an important one for us, hemoglobin. So hemoglobin also has a lot of symmetry that you can see here, another painting. It holds the light particles in a slightly different way, okay? And they're held around this iron molecule over here. Whether oxygen is bound or not makes a difference in the color. That's why when you get blood, you notice it's a darker red color when it becomes deoxygenated. But the same thing. You absorb a particular pigment, which I've written down here somewhere, so we're not seeing it today. And what's left to reflect is this nice red color. This one here is a particular personal favorite. This is the last of the chemistry paintings I'll show you. This one is coumarin. Does anyone know what coumarin is? Anybody work in perfumes? Speak up. What is it?
Spoiled hay.
Exactly. So it's a smell that's used in perfumes, and if you smell it, you'll go, ah, freshly cut grass. Okay? It turns out that coumarin is one of the most fluorescent compounds known to chemists, especially if you add an amino group, and they do tons and tons of chemistry with it. And this one is different than this one doesn't absorb. This one actually has it absorbs a photon, a light particle, but what it does is it kicks up one of its present electrons to a higher energy state. Okay, and when it does that, it emits a photon of a lower energy state, and that's fluorescence. Okay, so that's what happens with the fluorescent compound. Now, how can we use this compound and say something that's beautiful to neuroscientists? And I don't know if this is beautiful to artists or not, but let me show it to you. So we've been working with my neuroscience laboratory. It's been working with the chemistry laboratory. The name is Dalibor Shamus. And we asked them to take coumarin, which looks very much like the neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, and epinephrine. These all, neurotransmitters we need to live. And let's make coumarin that looks like dopamine, which is just a small change from the molecule I just showed you. This is the brain of a Drosophila, a fly brain. And when we use this compound, we get it taken up into all these nerve terminals. So we can see in this living fly brain where the nervous system is. And now we could take movies of it, and this fly we're giving amphetamine to. Amphetamine's a drug that releases dopamine. And we can watch it. We should be able to watch it. There we go. So you can see live neurotransmission right there. This is the first time people have been able to see this. And it's just by making coumarin into a neurotransmitter. So if you show this to neuroscientists, at least my lab and my friends will say, oh, that's beautiful. Let me show it to you in a mouse, okay? This is a mouse brain, and these are the little terminals. Each of them have dopamine in them, but they also have this false fluorescent neurotransmitter hitchhiking along with the dopamine. And when we'll stimulate it in a second, you'll see the release of this neurotransmitter, actually a false neurotransmitter. And now we can see for the first time that there's billions of these in the brain, and we can see them release, and we can see that they're different. One from the other is quite different. So let's see that. So this is before stimulation. About now, Danielle is stimulating, and you can see the release of this stuff. So you're looking at actual neurotransmission in the brain live. So coumarin, fluorescence, chemistry, neuroscience together. Now, here's another idea. I'm glad that one of the speakers brought up fractals. What is fractal? What does fractal math have to do with all this beauty? And of course, there's a lot of work on it, and you should all, who are interested in this, read Benoit Mandelbrot's book. It's a classic book on fractals and the geometry of nature. which is out of print, but you can still get it from Amazon anyway. And so the idea is, how do you get small ideas and reiterate them and come up with complex ideas, all right? And that's beautiful to people working in geometry. And so here's an idea. This is one of the simplest kinds of fractals. You take a star, or rather you take a triangle, then you repeat the triangle on each of the triangle sides. First one is the Star of David, and you repeat the triangles again. And finally, you get this thing called Koch snowflake, because it was developed by Gavin Koch. And so you can take very simple ideas and repeat them, and they turn out to have multi-dimensionality, which is kind of cool. We're going to bring that into music. This would be, if the screen was fitting properly, you'd see that this is perhaps the most famous fractal. It's called a Mandelbrot set. And this is the simple formula which develops the Mandelbrot set. And what people like about it is it keeps getting surprised as you go down and down in magnification. Look at smaller structures in the Mandelbrot set, you get all these beautiful unexpected kinds of structures which are in it. And so mathematicians like to abstract this into something very simple. You can regenerate the whole thing simply with this. So of course I painted this as well, and so now this is real art too as well. So should make artists just as happy, art departments as happy as science departments. Here's an example of how this interacts with fake nature. This is what movies like Avatar and many others do when they have to develop something that looks otherworldly, but doesn't look so otherworldly that it couldn't exist. And this one happens to be made with triangles. You take a triangle, you divide it again into other triangles, and you relatively randomly do that. You end up getting things that look like structures in nature. Here's one. This looks like a real landscape, but in fact it's made completely out of that triangle motif I just showed you. Okay, so that's a use of this. So it obviously entered widely into use. Second part of the talk here, let's bring in the animals and the secret history of abstract expressionism. So will animals also create art? Will these animals in nature, will scientists create art? I don't know. But will animals create art? I can say yes, they can. And it's hard to say, for a mockingbird, and is Oprah still here? Oh, good. Hi, Oprah. I'm going to show something really cool based on your work. Next slide. So the idea of animals, will they make music? It's hard for me to understand how somebody could say our local northern mockingbird isn't doing something like music. At some point, after they learn, hundreds of calls of other birds, and they learn to imitate cell phones and the click of a camera button and so on, what does that really have to do with, with evolutionary selection? I think it's harder than the zebra even. You really have to come up with something to do that. So with Oprah Chernovsky's work, previously he found that zebrafinches, another kind of songbird, would trigger their father's song to learn it, reproducibly listen to it. And with Linda Wilbrick, we looked at this years ago for fun, took one of these zebrafinches here in the cage, the same kind of system that we're using here. And first said, well, will they trigger other species? And they will. Just listen to a little bit of this. You'll hear the quack, quack, squawk is the zebrafinch. And you'll hear him hitting a little lever, which is very ergonomic for birds. They use their beak. And they're playing back sounds of several different birds, and they can learn which bird is from which lever. And they can do this thousands of times a day, especially when they're bored. So I hope we can hear this. So that's a zebrafinch. That's one of the sounds they're playing back. So some of them, they're going to hit one which kind of scares them, and you'll hear that in a second. That's a bird recording. The rattling is the lever. So that bird they particularly like. They keep getting it over and over. Okay, that's when they hit another bird with a scarier sound. Okay? All right, let's hear. Now, would they trigger human music. And they will also do this hundreds or thousands of times a day. They'll just sit there, there's no reward other than hearing the human music played back. They don't like rock music. They'll play it once and they'll never play it again. They tried it with instrumentalists, they heard it once and they like trumpets and trombones, which sound to me a lot like their own sound. So here they are triggering. This is live time, no editing. And I wanted to put on gamelan because it's really kind of cool. So this is birds triggering gamelan samples. Now the very rhythmic stuff is not them. The stuff which stops and starts and stutters like a DJ is when they're hit. For instance. So these are the zebra finches triggering this stuff at will. No training involved, no reward involved, other than hearing the sound playback. So I don't know what you want to call this. You could call it art if you like. So this brings us into elephants. One of the problems with animals playing music is what do they want to hear? Sometimes they hear differently. So very small animals. I almost brought a fruit fly recording here, but you can look at it on YouTube. It's right next to Lady Gaga. You would go to Drosophila, and you can hear the Drosophila mating calls and so on. But with elephants, they hear about an octave lower than we do on each side. So as was discovered by Katie Payne about maybe 20 years ago now, they have some very low frequencies that we don't hear, and this paper studied them and found that that's because it can travel for miles and miles and be a long-term communication for them, because the ears are far enough apart so that it can pick up these very low frequencies. Okay, at this point, let's go into the secret history. So these are the characters. I hope you'll be able to understand Vitaly's Russian accent. So one character he's talking about is Vasily Vatagin, who's shown here working on an animal. This was the founder of the Russian tradition of painting animals, and he's going to tell you a story. It's about 2 minutes long on what happened when Vasily was painting the entrance to the Berlin Zoo, which is still there before World War I. Then he called his friend, his name's cut off over here, but it's Vasily Kandinsky, who's Russian, but spent a great deal of his life in Germany to watch the elephant painting. This is one of the elephant paintings in Thailand that Vitaly and Komar, who's cut off over here, and Alex Melamed taught how to do. And this is a painting by Kandinsky, perhaps with some similarities. But here's the story on how Kandinsky learned about painting, elephant painting.
Many spectators treating elephant art as a kind of continuation of prolongation of the tradition of abstract expressionism. But I think it's completely wrong. I understand it differently, that abstract art was influenced by elephants. Because I used to know the great animal artist, Russian animal artist, Vasily Vatagin. He was ancient historian Plinius also describes such an elephant who made kind of strange characters, which remind maybe, for us, maybe it's remind kind of Chinese characters, hieroglyphs, etc. And Bataillon was so shocked by this story that he described this to her sister, and sister told to Kandinsky, and Kandinsky came to Berlin Zoo and spent a few hours just watch how elephant making this line, because some of the guru in this circle thought it's maybe a reincarnation of the soul of the artist. Maybe this elephant in previous life was the human being, it was artist, etc., etc. And Bataillon was sure that Kandinsky abstract art, Kandinsky was a pioneer of abstract art, as we know. Without Kandinsky, such a tradition couldn't exist. It was really beginning of the modern art, avant-garde, manifestation of avant-garde idea, how to develop, how to destroy even the old tradition of old art, etc. And maybe the elephant in charge of such a great movement of 20th century modern art as abstract art.
Okay. So the idea, how are we doing for time? It's about time to finish? Okay, so let's just, we're going to fast forward to the end of maybe the last minute or so. Let's just watch the elephant music and just get some idea of what that's about. Let's see, I should go to QuickTime here. So this is specially designed instruments that we made in Thailand, and we have a bit of watching the elephants play. Some of the elephants, like this younger one, you'll see that they're being coached by holding on the tooth. Other ones don't need the coaching. This is a woman who works at the Thai Elephant Conservation Center where this is occurring with a rein stick, because one of the few instruments we couldn't teach the elephants to work is a rein stick. And there's altogether 14 elephants in this orchestra playing live. No edits and no overdubs. Now a couple of other elephants have joined in on a Thai instrument called the Angalum. We try to make the music as to sound Thai. This is a much better trained elephant. The other one was only about 3 years old. This one's about 12. This particular elephant will play spontaneously. Here's a wider angle so you can get through. The Angalums are off the screen right now. They're the two women with rein sticks. Elephants aren't good at turning sticks for some reason. They can do it. I think we're going to get Maycott here, who is a 26-year-old female who doesn't need encouragement usually to play. And she likes to play very loud instruments. I think that would happen shortly. These are Thai temple bells. We just rig the system so they can be struck with hammers. And so the trick is to make it ergonomic for elephants. It's not to encourage them to play, it's to make it easy for them to play. Just like with birds. Okay, we'll stop here. Let's just let me talk to the ball if possible. There we go. Come on. that's Mika, who doesn't usually meet, and she's happy to have them. Okay, well, thank you very much. And,